What would you do if one day your younger brother abandoned you on a deserted island? No water, no phone, no way out. Just you and your 8-year-old child on their birthday. That's exactly what my daughter and I went through. But why did he do it, and what did I do to get us out of there? Let me tell you what happened. Here's our story. Hello, everyone. My name is Brenda. I'm 35 years old and currently living in Tampa, Florida. I'm a freelance civil engineer. My job isn't loud or chaotic, but it's never truly peaceful either. That's why every time I come home and see my husband and daughter safe and sound, it feels like the world finally has a place that belongs to me. Petra, my daughter, turned 9 this year. That girl is my lifeline, my motivation. She's everything to me. Each day, just seeing her smile, watching my husband hold her hand on the sofa as they enjoy one of their favorite TV shows together, I can quietly say to myself, yeah, peace. It finally found its way here. But to reach that peace, I had to go through a turning point I still don't have words for, an event that took more from me than I ever imagined. And from that day on, the meaning of family started to crack in ways that no piece could ever fully mend again. The story I'm telling you today happened a year ago. We went to my mom's house for dinner a few days before Petra's birthday. It was just a regular family meal with the light clinking of forks and knives on the table and bits of conversation about work, the weather, and the usual sports updates that Jackson always tried to bring up. But in the middle of that seemingly ordinary atmosphere, I said something no one knew would lead to what happened later. When my mom brought dessert, the chocolate chip cake Petra loved so much, I looked over at my daughter and everyone at the table. In a calm voice, I said, "This year for Petra's birthday, I'm not planning to throw the usual party at our place. Bryden, my husband, is on a business trip in Korea and won't be back in time, and all Petra wants is to go snorkeling." The moment I shared that with everyone, with visible excitement in my tone, Jackson, my younger brother, immediately said to me, "I know a pretty good spot. Beautiful view, clear water, not crowded." At that point, I looked at my brother, slightly hesitant. I wasn't sure if I wanted to bring my daughter along with Jackson. For years, I'd always kept a certain distance from him. Not because of hatred, but because I'd grown used to having to control everything when he was around. Jackson wasn't good at planning. He lived on impulse, often acting without thinking. And I couldn't let that impulsiveness affect my daughter. But when Petra heard something about snorkeling, she nearly jumped out of her seat excitedly. I didn't expect the way Jackson looked at Petra. His usual playful look faded into something strangely gentle, a rare focus in his eyes, like the girl truly meant something to him. Then, in a calm voice, he said to Petra, "I'll handle the location. Let me lead the way." When he saw I was still thinking it over, my mom leaned forward slightly with a clear look of support and gently said to me, "Just go." Petra needs experiences like that. She deserves it. After Mom's suggestion, I sat there silently for a few seconds. Seeing my mom and brother supportive, and my daughter unable to hide the hope in her eyes, I felt something soften inside me. Part of me wanted to believe that Jackson did want to do something kind this time, and because of that, I nodded in agreement. Knowing I had agreed, Jackson gave a faint smile. Not the usual mischievous one I was used to, but something calm and rare, like he was genuinely serious. In that moment, I felt a part of me ease. It had been a long time since I'd seen my brother like that. I still remember the year my father passed away. I had just turned 17 and Jackson was barely 12, a boy stuck in the middle of puberty, angry, reckless, and indifferent, facing a loss he didn't even know how to name. As for me, I became the one carrying the family overnight. I grew up with responsibility, with expectations no one ever said out loud. I tried to teach Jackson, make him live right, live straight, live with a plan, things I never got the chance to learn from anyone else. And for years, I kept wondering if I had failed. But that night, seeing him step up, thinking about Petra, and breaking out of that shell of irresponsibility he usually hid in, I honestly felt relieved. I even thought that maybe, just maybe, my little brother was finally starting to grow up. And I had no idea that from that moment, my daughter and I had unknowingly become part of a gamble, one with no warning signs. After that evening, I cleared my entire work schedule for the week. I wrapped up all my technical reports earlier than planned and set aside the weekend to take my daughter to the place she'd been dreaming about, Egmont Key, a small island about an hour offshore by canoe. I handled the snorkeling gear, drinking water, dry food, basic camping tools, and 2 first aid kits. I also packed flashlights, sunscreen, and a pair of walkie-talkies in case we lost signal. I've always believed that trips are meant to be enjoyed, but never without caution. I left for Jackson to handle the rest: canoe rental, anchoring point, and a temporary diving permits for the reef area. He said he'd been there several times with friends and seemed confident. The days leading up to the trip felt great. Petra counted down each morning. She checked her snorkel gear on her own, labeled her water bottle, and every night she'd chatter nonstop about clownfish, sea turtles, and all the pictures she would take to show her dad. Before bed, I'd video call my husband Bryden, who works in Seoul, South Korea. I told him about the plan, and Petra kept cutting in through the camera, waving and shouting that she was about to become an ocean explorer. With a soft smile, Bryden said to me through the screen, "Sounds amazing, but make sure you double-check everything, okay? And don't leave it all to Jackson. You know him. He's not exactly great at keeping commitments." After his warning, I chuckled and replied, "I know, but this time's different. Don't worry." I said it that way purposefully, even though I understood exactly why he was concerned. A few years ago, I had put Jackson in charge of a subcontracting job on a housing project. Just a simple foundation and a few days of basic site supervision. But 3 days in, he vanished, turned off his phone, left the whole crew hanging. I had to rush back from another project to handle the fallout, and nearly got hit with a breach of contract penalty. I knew Bryden hadn't forgotten that, just like I hadn't. And the bitter truth is, I never imagined he'd be right this time. A few days later, as the morning light streamed through Petra's bedroom window, the day she'd been waiting for finally arrived. We set out at 8:00 a.m. The 3 of us loaded the gear onto the boat, everything packed neatly. Jackson took the wheel. I held the GPS map, and Petra sat up front, binoculars in hand, eyes glowing with excitement. When we got there, I was honestly surprised. The coral reef was about 300 minutes from shore. The water was crystal clear, the wind was steady, and no tourists were in sight. It was nearly perfect for a light snorkeling trip. The moment we hit the sand, Petra jumped off the boat, eyes wide with joy. She pointed toward a nearby reef and shouted, "Mom, can we get in the water now? I want to dive right now." After her request, I nodded, then turned to Jackson and said, "Let's anchor the boat here, set up camp, and take turns diving." Jackson casually replied, "You two go ahead and dive first. Leave the campsite set up to me." I nodded again, and Petra and I headed into the water near the reef with our snorkel masks. We dove about 3 or 4 meters, deep enough to spot a sea turtle and a few tropical fish. Petra was thrilled, as if she were starring in a National Geographic documentary. I floated there in the calm, clear water, and my mind felt at ease for the first time in weeks. A few minutes later, while we were still near the reef, I surfaced to adjust my mask. The moment I turned back toward the shore, my heart felt like it slammed against my chest. The boat was gone. Not even 10 minutes earlier, it had been anchored right there, and now all I saw in front of me was open water and a few pieces of floating plastic debris. Realizing something wasn't right, I pulled Petra up to the surface, grabbed her shoulders, and said hoarsely, "Petra, hold on to me. Don't let go." The girl was gasping for breath, completely confused. I scanned the horizon. No shade, shelter, or drinking water. Our supplies, phones, and emergency lights all on the boat, and Jackson was gone. My throat tightened like an invisible hand was gripping my chest from the inside. I swam toward the nearest stretch of sand, dragging Petra with me, and found a cluster of rocks tall enough to give us a bit of shade. The island was utterly silent. There was no one but the 2 of us. Not a single boat appeared within 2, maybe even 3 miles. I tried shouting, but no one answered. I tried to stay optimistic. Maybe Jackson had just taken the boat around the bend or gone to take care of something out of sight. But as I scanned the sea, watching every patch of water stretching to the horizon, it was all empty. No sign he was ever coming back. 20 minutes later, the sun was high overhead. The temperature had climbed to 95 degrees F. The hot wind blew in harsh, dry waves. Petra started coughing, soft, scattered coughs. Her body was trembling from exhaustion. I knelt beside her, scooped up some seawater, and dabbed it onto her forehead, hoping it would slightly ease the heat. But her skin was burning to the touch, and her breathing was growing more uneven. No fresh water, no cool rock to lean on, no supplies to help me lower my daughter's body temperature. Everything we needed was out of reach. A surge of anger rose in my chest, hot like the sun burning us from above. I asked myself what the hell I was doing here. I blamed myself for dragging my daughter to a deserted island on her birthday, only to end up stranded with no way to reach the mainland. Thinking about it made me clench my fists so hard my knuckles turned white, my head burned, my heart pounded, not from fear, but from the rage that kept building with every passing second. I thought of Jackson, the brother I had defended more times than I could count, the one I had given a second chance and a third. And now he had vanished like this whole thing was nothing but some stupid joke. I didn't want to believe he did it on purpose, but with every minute, I couldn't find a single other explanation, and that made me feel like I was going insane. When I started to honestly believe that my daughter and I had been abandoned on that island by my brother, something inside me sank and I stopped hoping Jackson would come back. I didn't think about blaming him or calling for help anymore. At that moment, I was only focused on one thing: finding shade or anything that might buy us more time until something, anything, showed up. I scanned the open ground, searching through the bushes along the shoreline. A few pieces of trash had washed in on the sand. Plastic bags, broken foam, a cracked plastic container, and an old Pepsi bottle that made me stop. The bottle was dented, covered in sand, its label peeled off, and less than a quarter of the liquid remained at the bottom. I unscrewed the cap and took a cautious sniff. Sweet. No foul smell. I took a small sip, and the sting in my throat eased a little. I handed the bottle to Petra. She held it with both hands and drank slowly, afraid to spill a drop. Just those few sips were enough to help us hang on a bit longer. Beneath the shade of a dry, jagged rock, we sat in silence. Petra rested her head on my thigh, eyes half closed, her breathing shallow. I touched her chest, feeling each tired rise and fall, and then the questions came flooding in. What if no one shows up? What if we have to stay here overnight? What if something happens to Petra? What the hell am I supposed to do? I remembered what she had whispered to me right after we surfaced from the water. Did he leave us, Mom? A simple question, but it cut through me like ice. I didn't answer. Not because I didn't know, but because I couldn't. I've lived through hard years, worked far from home, slept in construction site containers, and skipped meals to send money back. I'm used to enduring, but never had I felt as helpless as I did in that moment. After everything that had happened, I couldn't bring myself to look into my daughter's eyes, the eyes of a child now silently fighting the pain of being abandoned by her own family. 2 hours later, Petra began to fade. Her eyes were glazed, her breathing broken and shallow. I held her close and whispered, "Mom's here. I'm not going to let anything happen to you." But I knew those words were just a desperate attempt to keep myself from falling apart. At that point, I felt completely hollow. Worry, anger, helplessness. They all collapsed into a numb silence. I couldn't believe Jackson had left us. I had forgiven him before. I had hoped. I had defended him. And now the price I was paying was holding my child as she slowly slipped into exhaustion in my arms. I realized then the most terrifying thing wasn't the heat or the isolation. I knew I had trusted the wrong person again. And what I couldn't have known was that this was only the beginning. There were cruelties ahead that I hadn't even begun to imagine. By around 2:00 in the afternoon, with the sun still beating down on us relentlessly, I could feel my body giving out. My head was spinning from dehydration and the heat that had been building up for hours. Petra lay quietly in my arms, her lips cracked, her breath shallow, her skin flushed, and her back drenched in sweat. Even after drinking a bit from an old Pepsi bottle, she no longer had the strength to open her eyes or respond. I gently patted her shoulder, trying to soothe her, and maybe just as much to keep myself from panicking. I still couldn't fully grasp what was happening. Part of me kept trying to hold on to reason, but all I could see around me was sand, wind, the still ocean, and the faint sound of my daughter breathing. Just when the world around me started to blur, a strange sound suddenly echoed from the horizon. As it grew louder, I felt something approaching, something that carried hope. And for the first time, I dared to believe that maybe we wouldn't have to collapse out here this time. The sound was faint at first, then gradually more transparent. I lifted my head, straining to see past the blinding glare on the water. For a second, my heart tightened. I thought it was Jackson coming back. I hoped, even if just for the briefest moment. But no, it wasn't him. It was an old local fishing boat, stopping near the shore to check its engine. One crew was bent over the machinery, then looked up, and in just a few seconds, they spotted the two of us sitting motionless in the shade. It wasn't until I heard their voices shouting from a distance and saw figures running along the deck that I truly believed we were being rescued. They pulled us onto the boat right away. I could barely stay upright, managing only a few broken words begging for water for my daughter. One man shoved a cool water bottle into my hand while another gently took Petra from me, trickled some water into her mouth, then checked her pulse and breathing. Petra was in severe heat stroke, limp and unresponsive. The boat immediately turned back to shore, and as soon as we docked, they had already called for an ambulance waiting at the harbor. I nearly collapsed onto the deck as the gurney doors swung open. Petra was rushed straight to the ER, and I barely heard the doctor asking for my name before everything went black. In that last moment before I lost consciousness, I turned my head trying to catch one last glimpse of my daughter, and I felt more than anything gratitude, a tight ache in my chest, because at the very least we still had a chance to live. While I lay in the emergency room, everything around me seemed to shatter into fragments of sound and light. All I could remember were the wheels of the gurney rolling, the urgency in voices echoing through the cold hallway, and the steady beep of the heart monitor behind a white curtain. As consciousness slowly returned, the bright overhead lights made me squint. My left arm was still hooked up to IV, and my throat burned like fire. As soon as I could move, I looked around for a nearby nurse. Then with a dry, raspy voice, I asked, "Where's my daughter? How's Petra?" The moment the words left my mouth, I felt a sharp pang in my chest. Not from the IV, but from a wave of fear rising like an undertow. A few seconds later, a doctor walked in. Under the harsh light, his face turned solemn. In a calm voice, he said, "Your daughter is suffering from severe heat stroke and dehydration. She's receiving fluids, and we're monitoring her kidney and neurological functions." Hearing that, I closed my eyes for a moment. It felt like swallowing a block of ice. My chest tightened again. Not from pain, but from the crushing weight of helplessness. A few minutes later, the door swung open. Rushed footsteps, a familiar voice. It was my mother, Sophia. The moment she saw me in that hospital bed, panic filled her eyes. She rushed to my side, her voice trembling as she asked, "What happened? Where's Petra? And you? How did it come to this?" Looking into her eyes, I had no strength to keep it together. With broken breaths and a heavy stare, I said, "Jackson left us on the island. No boat, nothing." She froze after hearing that. Her face showed no evident emotion, just a profound shock in her eyes. Outside the room, footsteps echoed down the hall. A hospital staff member leaned close to the doctor, whispering something quietly. Moments later, I heard the doctor next to me speak clearly. "The case has been reported to CPS and the police." Each word landed like a stone. I closed my eyes. My mind went blank, but I felt my chest go cold with every heartbeat. That was all I needed to know. My brother had crossed a line he could never return from. About 2 hours later, once I was stable enough, the police came in to take my initial statement. I leaned back against the pillow, clasped my hands tightly to keep my voice steady, and began recounting everything in order, every detail, leaving nothing out. Ultimately, I made one thing clear. This wasn't an accident. It wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate, and the person who left us behind was my brother, the one I used to trust more than anyone. And at that moment, I knew that this wouldn't be recklessness if he didn't return. It was a choice, intentional, calculated, and maybe irreversible. While I was still working with the police to complete the initial report, my mother, Sophia, was trying to contact Jackson. She told me he still hadn't come home since we'd left for the island. She had called multiple times, but his phone went straight to voicemail. That's when I started to feel something was off. A heavy sinking feeling in my chest, part worry, part suspicion. But even then, I still couldn't bring myself to believe that while my daughter was fighting for her life, Jackson could be somewhere else entirely, wholly removed from the consequences of what he had done. As for my mother, when she arrived at the hospital and saw Petra lying in the ICU, barely breathing, she nearly collapsed from the shock. But what broke my heart even more was that she still clung to a gentle tone, even after seeing it all with her own eyes. Still tried to defend Jackson, still repeated the same things I'd heard too many times in my life. He's still young, there must be a reason, and maybe he got lost. I didn't respond to her excuses for Jackson. I didn't feel the need to explain anything anymore. All I could think was this: if this is what my family calls compassion, then I don't know what I can believe in anymore. And this time, I wasn't sure I could stay calm. After the police and CPS staff left, I sat silently in the waiting room outside the ICU. my hands clasped together, not sure if I was praying or just trying to hold myself upright. I looked down at my wrists, still streaked with sea salt, sand, sweat, and dried blood. But no physical pain had ever scared me the way this did. There was only one thought in my head, hoping Petra would wake up, hoping she wouldn't leave me to live the rest of my life with the question, what if I had said no that day? There is no greater torment than a mother having to face the cost of her own choice, when that cost could be the life of her only child. And by some miracle, she woke up just a few hours later, nearly 5 hours after being admitted to the ICU. Petra started to open her eyes. Her gaze was still cloudy, her pupils slow to react to the white lights overhead. I leaned in close. She frowned a little, then whispered so faintly that I had to hold my breath to catch the words. "Don't let me fall asleep again, Mom. I'm scared." I didn't say anything. I just pulled her head gently to my chest. Tears fell onto her wrist, soaking into the cold fabric of the hospital sheets. It felt like someone was crushing my heart in their hand. Every beat asked the same question. How did I let this happen? When Petra finally fell asleep again, this time a real restful sleep, I stepped out into the hallway. And right then, Jackson showed up. He came quickly through the double doors holding a water bottle, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on me. His face was wearing that fake look of confusion, a rushed, awkward concern so clearly staged that I recognized it with a glance. Before anyone could say a word, he jumped into an explanation. He said he returned to the island but didn't see anyone and thought we had already left. As I listened, I stood still, but the anger in my chest started rising. His voice stayed smooth. His eyes dodged mine like a kid reciting lines in front of a mirror. I'd heard him lie before, many times, but never like this, never in a moment like this. I felt the blood rush to my temples, my hands clenched into fists without me realizing it. Not because his story was convincing, but because he dared to stand in a hospital surrounded by the hum of respirators and the sharp smell of disinfectant and spin some made-up tale to cover up what he'd done. At that moment, I wasn't just a sister who was betrayed. I was a mother who had just barely pulled her daughter back from the edge. And standing in front of me was the person who had put that child there. Then, when he repeated it, I thought you two had already left. I couldn't hold back anymore. I walked straight toward him, grabbed the collar of his shirt, and yanked him close enough to see the sweat forming on his temple. With a low growl, barely held back in my throat, I clenched my teeth and shouted in his face. I was out there for hours, climbing rocks, searching every corner. I didn't see a single damn boat. You never came back. After my outburst, the air around us felt frozen solid. My eyes locked onto his pale, stunned face, and my grip tightened so hard my knuckles turned white. And then I smelled it. A faint trace of alcohol on his breath. Not strong, but sharp enough to kill any last sliver of hope inside me. I froze, my chest clenched like it had been torn open. I didn't need to hear another excuse. I didn't need another lie. In that moment, I saw him for what he was. Not just the little brother I'd grown up with, but someone who had betrayed everything I believed in. Not just through action, but through a cold, calculated kind of lying. The kind that doesn't flinch, doesn't blink. While I was still gripping his collar, fury surging through me, my mother Sophia rushed over, reaching out to stop me, her voice gentle but firm. She told me to calm down, told me to trust Jackson, said maybe he did get lost. Perhaps he was just scared and didn't know how to come back. I didn't answer. I looked at her, but I couldn't see her, not in that moment. Every word she spoke in his defense felt weightless. Not wrong exactly, just too late and too familiar. After everything that had happened, I understood one thing with absolute clarity. If I didn't force the truth into the light, there would be more lies, layer after layer, until no one remembered what was real anymore. Just as the tension reached a breaking point, my mother still standing between me and Jackson, trying to keep me from losing it all over again, a familiar figure appeared at the end of the hospital hallway. It was Beau, my uncle, my father's only brother. He lived alone in the western countryside, nearly a 6-hour drive from Tampa. Ever since my father passed away, Beau had made the trip into the city every few months without fail, always bringing little gifts from home, jars of homemade jam, a bag of fruit, and more importantly, the quiet, steady presence of the only man left in my life I could still trust. This time was no different. I would later learn that he called my mom when he arrived at the house and found it empty. When she said hospital, he turned his car around and drove straight to us, no questions asked. Uncle Beau wasn't the type to say much. After pulling us apart and getting a brief update from my mother, He walked straight to Petra's room and asked the nurse if he could go in alone. He stood there in silence for a few minutes, just looking at the girl hooked up to IVs. He didn't blink. When he came back out, he scanned the room. I was still in my hospital gown, my mother stood to the side, and Jackson, still wearing that same look of feigned innocence. I didn't know what Beau was thinking, but his eyes, always firm even when I was a kid, were darker now, like he'd already seen everything he needed to in that one quiet glance. Right then, the police returned. They walked in purposefully and informed us that Jackson was being taken into temporary custody for investigation. I wasn't surprised. I just turned to look at him, the brother who had built a story to cover his tracks. My mother nearly fell apart. She rushed toward Jackson, grabbed his arm, stammering, "No! What are you doing? He's just a kid." She still looked at him like he hadn't done anything wrong, like love could erase consequences. I said nothing, and Uncle Beau stepped forward, nodded to the officers, and stood there calm and unshaken. His back was straight, and his hands were clasped tightly before him. Seeing him there, I realized something. If he hadn't shown up that day, I don't know if I would have had the strength to hold it together through what came next. After the police took Jackson away, Uncle Beau was the first to approach my mom. He didn't yell. He didn't point fingers. He just placed a hand on her shoulder. And in that moment, I realized he was trying to hold everything together before it fell apart even more. As for me, I went back to the hospital room and sat by Petra's bedside for hours. The air felt heavy and compressed, like the whole world had gone quiet except for the drip of the IV and the faint, steady beeping of her heart monitor ticking down like a countdown clock. I didn't know then that while I was sitting there, the police had confiscated Jackson's phone and started a digital investigation, and what they found sent the entire case spiraling in a direction no one could have expected. A few hours later, a CPS officer entered the hospital waiting room. They didn't say much. I confirmed my name and was handed a copy of the temporary report. The paper was still sharply creased. The ink smelled fresh. The scent of the paper was still strong. I unfolded it, and there they were. Text messages pulled from Jackson's phone about him that day. The very first message felt like a punch to the chest. It read, "I left the mom and kid out on the island. No one knows. I won. Take me out for a drink." Right below that was a confirmation from his betting group that said, "$3,000, man. You guys owe me." And finally, a private message to his girlfriend. "It's done. Take me out to celebrate." I read every message slowly, each word pressing heavier on my chest. While my daughter was still on oxygen, hooked up to an IV in the emergency room, my little brother had gambled away our lives for a $3,000 payout from some nameless group of friends. And the worst part, while the rest of us were still clinging to that tiny, desperate hope that maybe this was all just a mistake, he, the one who started it all, was sitting in a bar in downtown Tampa, arm around his girlfriend, raising a glass like he'd just accomplished something worth celebrating. After reading the file the CPS worker gave me, I knew this wasn't an accident. This was a crime, and the one who committed it was the person I used to call my brother. But the pain that hit me the hardest came after that. A few hours after the initial investigation, under the cold stare of the detective and the mounting pressure from undeniable evidence, once Jackson had fully sobered up and was forced to confront the weight of what he'd done, he confessed. Not with tears, not with remorse, but with a calm, fluent voice, like he'd rehearsed it beforehand. He said that after our dad died, I became this overbearing shadow that hovered over him for years. He said, "She controlled everything. What I wore, where I went, who I saw, what I did. She always acted like she was right, constantly lectured me about living responsibly, getting a real job, and giving up the pointless things I called my passions." He said he was tired, and this time he just wanted me to feel what he'd always felt inside, the weight of being judged, trapped, and abandoned in his own home. He admitted that at first he planned to come back, but after getting the $3,000 from his buddies and heading to a bar with his girlfriend to celebrate, he just forgot about me and Petra. He forgot that out there on a barren island, 2 people were waiting for him to return, and by the time he remembered, things had gone too far to fix, too far to undo. Out of fear, he lied. I wasn't in the room when those words were spoken, but when the detective repeated every line to me, I felt it through Jackson's eyes. I was never the sister he needed, just a stiff shadow of duty and expectations. And to break free from that shadow, he left me stranded on a deserted island alongside the innocent 8-year-old child I brought. After everything that had happened, I realized this. Some cracks in a family aren't formed by time. They're carved deep, one cut at a time, by the very hands of those we call our own. When I received the investigation report, I sat silently beside Petra's bed, my mind spinning from everything I just heard. Jackson's confession replayed in my head like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. At some point, I must have drifted off without realizing it, and the whole time, Uncle Bo sat beside us, quietly, watching over me and my daughter like a steady, silent shadow. The next morning, I was jolted awake by a familiar voice. My husband Bryden had returned from South Korea when he heard the news. When he saw our daughter lying motionless in the hospital bed, he didn't cry out loud, but his eyes, it was like something inside them shattered into 1,000 pieces. In that moment, all I wanted to do was hold him and say something, anything. But my throat was tight and my heart didn't even know where to begin. After I told him everything, including what Jackson had confessed, Bryden didn't say a word immediately. He just quietly sat down, gently ran his fingers through our daughter's hair, then turned to me and pulled me into an embrace. A hug that felt like it was holding me up while also keeping his world from falling apart. Then, in a hoarse voice that sounded like each word had to be forced out, he whispered, "If anything happens to our daughter, I won't let him get away with it." I didn't respond to his words. I just nodded because we both knew in that moment forgiveness no longer had a place in either of our hearts. A week after Petra woke up, her condition had almost fully recovered. The moment she laughed in that hospital room, something inside me began to loosen layer by layer. The red marks on her skin had started to fade, replaced by a warm flush of life, a quiet confirmation that my daughter had made it through. While we were still holding on to that joy, the Hillsborough County Court officially accepted the criminal case against Jackson. 2 weeks later, the preliminary hearing was held. Jackson was ordered to wear an electronic ankle monitor, was forbidden from leaving the state of Florida, and most importantly, was prohibited from coming within 200 feet of Petra or me. When the judge delivered the final ruling, probation, community service, and special supervision for the duration of the sentence, I didn't feel relief. But from the back row, I heard my mother break into tears. In that moment, I turned around, and for the first time in years, I saw her truly collapse. Her body slumped into the chair, eyes tightly shut, hands gripping a crumpled tissue like it was the only thing left holding her together. Right then, I knew she was heartbroken. Not just because of the sentence, but because she could no longer deny the truth about the son she had always defended. As the judge stepped down, the police and representatives from Child Protective Services began gathering their files. I overheard one of the investigators quietly telling the prosecutor that the group of friends who had placed bets with Jackson that day had also been summoned. They weren't criminally charged, but were hit with civil penalties for encouraging dangerous behavior involving a minor. They were also issued formal warnings and a no-contact order with my family for the monitoring period. In that moment, I knew at least this time justice hadn't overlooked anyone. But what no one expected happened after the trial when Jackson was allowed to give his final statement to the court. With a blank stare and a flat tone, he stood in the center of the room, turned to me, and said in front of everyone, "I didn't mean to hurt anyone. I just wanted to challenge them a little. It was survival, that's all. Brenda always taught me to take care of myself." His words hit the room like a slap in the face. Silence fell. No one responded. The judge slightly nodded before ending the hearing with a firm gavel strike. But things didn't end there. About 10 minutes later, as people started to file out of the courthouse, I spotted Uncle Bo leaning against the hallway railing, hands tucked into his coat pockets, eyes fixed on the courtroom door like he was waiting for something. And then, as soon as Jackson stepped out, Uncle Bo walked straight toward him. His pace was calm but firm, the kind of steady stride that only comes from someone who's lived long enough to know when to hold his tongue and when to speak up. He stopped before Jackson, standing close enough that only the two could hear. With a low voice and eyes like cold steel, he asked, "So, you call that a survival challenge?" Jackson froze. He didn't answer. His gaze darted away. Right then, Uncle Bo stepped in closer, and without winding up, without a single warning, he threw a punch clean and hard, landing square on Jackson's face. It wasn't enough to knock him down, but it forced him back a step. No one moved fast enough to stop it. The punch echoed through the hallway, crisp and sharp, as everyone held their breath. But no one stepped in. not because they approved, but because they understood that the hit didn't come from rage. It came from a disappointment boiling quietly for far too long. Uncle Bo stood there for a few seconds, silent. Then, still upright, he looked Jackson straight in the eyes and said, voice level and heavy, "You like survival? I'll show you what it means to survive." He didn't shout, he didn't insult, but every word landed like a weight. Then he turned and walked away, leaving Jackson standing still, and the whole hallway wrapped in a silence no one knew how to break. The next day, Bo officially submitted a request to the court, volunteering to take on community supervision for Jackson during his probation. He agreed to be Jackson's guardian, taking him in rather than letting him be sent to a juvenile detention center. When the officers asked if he was sure, reminding him this was a serious responsibility, he looked at them and said, "He wants to live like it's survival? I'll let him live exactly like he said." And just 2 days later, Jackson was relocated to Uncle Bo's cowboy ranch, a place with no Wi-Fi, smartphones, weekend parties, cocktails, or cushion seats. There were horse stalls, open fields, wooden sheds, mechanical tools, and a daily work schedule from 5 in the morning until 7 at night. Jackson would sleep in a wooden shack, bathe in cold water, wash dishes with ash from the fire pit, and cook his meals after finishing his assigned tasks. Uncle Bo didn't teach with lectures or life lessons. He taught with shovels, saddle straps, and the sweat of honest labor. At that point, I knew if anyone could make Jackson understand what consequences truly looked like, it was him. Today marks exactly 1 year since that fateful day. This is also Petra's 9th birthday, but this year, she didn't ask for cake. She didn't ask to go anywhere. She didn't want any gifts. When I asked her what she wanted, she looked up at me and in a soft voice said, "I just want to stay home with you and Dad." After she said that, I pulled her into a hug, and I understood, in her heart, just having her parents nearby was a gift enough. My husband Bryden left his job at the international travel company. After his last business trip to Seoul, he chose to work from home, taking on local projects. No more back and forth flights, no more time zones, no more distance. He told me, "No kind of success is worth the look of fear in our daughter's eyes in the emergency room." As for my mother, since Uncle Bo took Jackson away, she left town and moved into a small monastery in North Carolina. She lives quietly now, like someone chosen to serve a silent sentence. Now and then, I get handwritten letters from her. No apologies, no mention of the present. She still carries these fragments of old memories about me as a child. I don't write back. Some things are better left in silence. And me? I'm still here living in the same house, still doing the same job. Every evening, I take Petra on a walk, and I always leave one spot open on the porch, reserved for whoever dares to return on foot, not with excuses. Today, Petra looked at me and asked, "If Uncle Jackson comes back, would you forgive him?" I gently shook my head and said, "When your heart is truly ready, forgiveness will come on its own." After everything, I've come to realize not every wound has to heal. But if there's still love left, then maybe, just maybe, things can begin again, right from the place we thought it all ended. That's where my story ends. And before I close this chapter, I want to ask you, those of you who've stayed with me through every step of this journey, was I wrong for no longer being able to forgive my brother? I genuinely want to hear your thoughts. Please share your perspective. I'm listening. If the story has touched something in you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and walk with me through whatever comes next. Thank you from the bottom of my heart.